Texas has the most of the top 100 bottlenecks of any state in the country.
Well, let's kind of start here with the list. And I'm curious, how did ATRI compile this list? And what I mean is, what factors or data did you consider? How did you use that information to decide which are the worst trucking bottlenecks?
Absolutely. So, talk to anyone depending on where they drive or live, and they'll tell you they have some of the worst congestion of any place in the country. So it's an often a very subjective measure. So the way ATRI approaches it is we use our data set of truck GPS data. So since 2002, we've been working with a data set of GPS data that generates from over 1 million freight trucks, so predominantly Class 7, Class 8 vehicles. We look at two factors. We look at how slowly trucks are operating and how many trucks are impacted in each specific congestion choke point. So right now, for the last few years, we have been monitoring, I think the number is up to 328 locations across the US. So every state has at least one location that we monitor. Some states have many more, of course, the bigger states. So we take a full calendar year worth of this GPS data and we analyze, so January to December, and then we analyze again at each specific location how slowly trucks are operating as a result of congestion, what's the average speed, and then how many trucks are impacted, what's the volume going on there. So how impactful is that specific location's congestion to the trucking industry at large? Speed and volume go into the calculation to come up with the top 100. And Mark, as you've seen, some places just want to hang on to their spot in the top 10, whereas others, we have good news to tell in this list. So that's what I love about this list is it really does allow us to provide a roadmap for the state DOTs to fix certain locations, but it also allows us to tell really good stories about the value of infrastructure investment.
Okay. Just some general questions here. Are these bottlenecks mainly places where people are passing through an area? Is it local traffic that's driving this congestion? Does proximity to major shipping locations or ports play a role? Uh, what do you know in terms of the cause of all this?
Well, I would say the answer is yes to all of those. So, for instance, I live in Atlanta, and anyone who's driven through Atlanta knows 285, and that's where the majority of the bottlenecks in the Atlanta area are around 285, our perimeter. So there are a lot of things going on there. Atlanta is a through city for a lot of trucks. You're coming up out of Florida, you're headed west out of the port of Savannah or out of South Carolina. You're headed up into Tennessee or points north. So it is a big through state. But let's face it, it's a very populous city. So there's a lot of freight demand for just the folks like myself who live here in Atlanta, also driving a lot of that truck traffic and creating a lot of four-wheeler traffic to mix in with the trucks.
I'd like to discuss some of the specific bottlenecks on your list here and just a few examples. And number one, of course, Fort Lee, New Jersey, I-95 at State Route 4. And I'm assuming, kind of looking at maps, we're talking about the tangle of exit and entrance ramps just west of the George Washington Bridge. How bad is this bottleneck? How much time is it delaying travelers?
It's a bad one. And that, unfortunately, Mark, is one of those locations that I don't know that we're going to see fall out of the top 10 in our lifetimes. Because it is where, on the New Jersey side of the GW Bridge, where there are so many roads coming together and you've got tremendous population density there. So you're always going to have truck traffic, but you don't have a lot of opportunity to expand that infrastructure or greatly change that infrastructure like we've seen in other locations. You're going over a bridge. It's a toll bridge. So it is just a perfect storm of factors that weigh into the George Washington Bridge being one of the number one truck bottleneck in the country now for the seventh year in a row that we've been doing this analysis.
And you mentioned all the highways. Of course, there is I-95 and State Route 4, as you mentioned in your top 10 list. But looking at a map, I think I saw US 46 in there, US 9 highway. How many different highways funnel into this tangle of roadways? Because I'm sure I missed some.
No, it is. I think the magic number there is six that are all coming together. And I have been on the New York side of the George Washington Bridge. In fact, I was just there not too long ago. I've not myself driven on the New Jersey side of it, but I have seen many pictures that local journalists have posted in coordination with stories about the bottleneck. And just the signage there is, enough to make your mind become a bottleneck because it's just, oh my gosh, which route am I taking? How do I do this? It's just a very difficult place for anyone, four-wheelers, 18-wheelers to navigate through.
Let's go on to number two here, and that's in Chicago. And in fact, I think it's a location that I'm somewhat familiar with. I-294 at I-290. Um, and on the map, again, this appears that it's just out of sight of Chicago's west side in the suburbs. And again, let's start with the obvious thing here. How bad is this intersection?
Well, and this one's a tough one. It is one of our newer bottlenecks in terms of what we've been monitoring, because we started to see congestion build, but it's also a location where there is construction underway. And, construction is a double-edged sword for us in the trucking industry because it generally means good news, the infrastructure is being fixed and there's, light at the end of this tunnel. But the bad news is it just creates exponentially more congestion when we're traveling through those locations, be it from either, cones and lanes blocked off, or just you have to slow because there are road workers present. Whatever the case may be, it just creates additional congestion. But Chicago's one of our success stories in terms of seeing what happens when projects finally get finished.
The tollway, the Illinois tollway, on their website said that this highway carries the highest volume of passenger and freight traffic in the tollway system in that state. And I'm kind of curious. I remember this from many years ago when I lived in the area where they still had the little baskets you tossed your coins into.
Right.
And obviously, I think that they've improved it from there, I'm sure. But what role does the toll play in terms of creating congestion at that location, or are they onto open road tolling and it's not really a factor?
Well, it's interesting because one of my professional driver friends mentioned to me recently when I was talking about the GW Bridge, the number one location, and she said it's much better now that they've gone to electronic tolling. She said it's gotten better. Now, better is a relative term when you're talking about the worst bottleneck in the country, but there are ways if you are going to collect a toll. Obviously, it's more efficient for drivers to be able to go through that gantry at highway speeds or closer to highway speeds as much as the traffic congestion will allow. But, certainly we would all love it if they weren't told and we could just keep on driving and keep on driving.
Well, and I would think another factor there, of course, is that I-294 is the tri-state tollway. And of course, you've got to have a lot of traffic, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, all being in there. And I would think that that also probably contributes to the situation.
It does. And that's another case where in talking to professional driver friends who say, anytime you have a location like that where you pull a lot of drivers from adjacent states who may not be as familiar with that location, they're not as comfortable driving through it. They don't know sort of the rules of the road for that particular bottleneck, and that just exacerbates the congestion situation.
Yeah. And of course, I'd imagine with Chicago being where it is in the country and being kind of a shipping hub, that the amount of freight traffic moving there has got to be part of the problem.
Absolutely. And when you look at some of the other Chicago bottlenecks we have on the list, we've got one out near a rail yard. So you've got a lot of intermodal traffic coming into and off of that particular interchange. And so you're right. We're not the only mode in town for moving freight. And so because Chicago is such a big rail hub, we've also got that added into the mix. Plus, just it's a huge population center. So you've got all
Yeah.
the four-wheelers mixing in with the freight traffic.
I would normally jump right to number three on your list at this point, but instead, I want to ask you about something you kind of mentioned earlier and is on your top 10 list, and that is that three of these bottlenecks are in one metro area, Atlanta. Now, as I understand, it's I-285 at I-85, I-75 at I-285, I-20 at I-285. What's the best advice here? Just avoid I-285 or Atlanta overall?
Well, it is, I mean, and I've lived here 32 years. It is, and the growth we've experienced is tremendous. And so, and originally, decades ago, when 285 was originally built, it was built for specifically for freight traffic to get around Atlanta. So you didn't have to go through downtown Atlanta on 7585. But we've had such tremendous growth outside of 285 that it's just been eclipsed by all of that. So to Georgia DOT's credit, we have seen more investment in fixing these bottlenecks. So you started 85 and 285, we call that Spaghetti Junction here in Atlanta. You come around to 75, that's very close to my office here. That's where the new Braves Park was put in a number of years ago. And then you keep going and you hit where 20 is. And 20, of course, heads west to go to Alabama and points west from there. So you've got tremendous truck traffic, tremendous car traffic, and it really is a perfect storm. But we've got another location around 285 that was last year number 9, and that's where Georgia 400, State Road 400 and I-285 intersect. It was number 9 on last year's list. Georgia DOT completed the construction, and they are now down to number 29. So they dropped 20 spaces once that construction was finished. So I just heard the Georgia DOT commissioner, I saw a press release from his office recently where he touted the fact that when they made the investment, they saw the payoff and that they dropped out of the top 10 of freight bottlenecks in the country.
There's another metro area that had a couple on the top 10 list. And again, it seems an obvious one, Houston. Uh, and both of these involve Interstate 45. You've got I-45 at Interstate 69, I-45 at I-10. And Houston, of course, is just a massive population center, but also I would think that the shipping coming in would spur a lot of intermodal freight and would spur all kinds of other freight on trucks. Is it just that, or is it the proximity, say, to, I don't know, freight coming up from Mexico, or are we in another all of the above situation?
It is somewhat of an all of the above. I mean, we see cities where there are port facilities have their fair share of truck bottlenecks. Anywhere around the country, you will see that. And the other thing I note about Houston when I drive there is, I think Atlanta has lots of lanes of traffic, but we look small in compared to Houston, where you've got 6 lanes in each direction. And so when you think about the fact that those lanes are operating so slowly as to drive those bottlenecks into high on this list, it really is, you understand the scale of how bad the traffic congestion is in and around Houston. So you've got ports, you've got rail yards, you've got a big population center, you've got proximity to, other big cities in Texas that are also driving those bottlenecks. Texas has the most of the top 100 bottlenecks of any state in the country.
Mm, that does not sound good. Well, and I know just having driven, say, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that it just seems like every time they turn around, there's another development and they build another highway. And it is, for an outsider, pretty confusing, just the mass of highways that are going through that area.
It is, and I have a son who recently moved to Dallas, and I've told my husband, anytime we go visit, you're going to have to drive because it just scares the bejeebies out of me. So, if that's a technical research term, bejeebies, but
Yes, but I understand because, yeah, it does scare the bejeebies out of you. And of course, the other thing there is, although it's open road tolling, you never quite know when you're on a toll road. They just kind of sneak up on you.
I have noticed that as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you said earlier that did catch my attention was you said that there was some good news on this list. And you've mentioned a couple of examples, but of all the good news, what are one or two items that you think are the best news out of what you learned for this year's survey?
Well, I would say the Jane Byrne interchange in Chicago. So that was originally we tout it now as the poster child for why this particular analysis is so important. Used to be called the Circle interchange, and when we first started doing this analysis, that location was number one for 3 years in a row. At that point, I mean, hadn't even touched Fort Lee yet. At that point, or Fort Lee hadn't touched the number one yet. At that point, this governor of Illinois at the time was Pat Quinn. Governor Quinn issued a press release from his office that said, we're going to fix the Circle interchange because we no longer want to have the number one truck bottleneck in the country. Well, in true Illinois, but certainly Chicago fashion, took a whole lot longer to do, cost a whole lot more money than they originally expected. But because we have this long-term data set of truck GPS data, what we were able to do, Mark, is go back and look at what truck speeds were before they started that construction, and then look at what the truck speeds were when they completed that construction many, many years later. And what we found is a nearly 25% increase in truck speeds. Now, speeds are still low. We're not talking, 55 to 85 miles per hour, whatever. They're still below the posted speed limit because of all the congestion there. But the fact that we could see that marked improvement is, I think, a real strong indicator of how valuable infrastructure investment is. Because
Uh,
again, as I like to remind people, if truck speeds are improving, car speeds are improving as well. Everybody is having an easier time getting through that location.
and that is a big deal in Chicago. I mean, it is the third largest city in the country. It's just a massive center for just about everything.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, then, the other success story, because I live very close to it, is the Georgia 400 I-285 one and I was pleased to see that the Georgia DOT picked up on that big slide down the list.
Okay. Well, I'm curious here. A lot of this, it sounds like you kind of could look at your past research, and it was somewhat predictable that certain things would be moving in certain directions on the list. The addition of construction, the completion of construction, and so on. Were there any surprises for you? Anything that you looked at it and it just was completely unexpected?
Well, it's always interesting when we have a location move up. So I mentioned earlier, we monitor 328 locations. When we see somebody jump up into the 100, that suddenly they're on the list now, we go look. And so we had a location in Milwaukee this year that jumped up into the top 100, and I have to put on my reading glasses to get it here. So it's the Mitchell interchange, I-94, I-894, and it had been down in the 200s. It's just one of the locations we monitor. Jumped up. It's at number 95, so it's not high up on the list, but anytime somebody pops into that top 10 or top 100, we need to go figure out what's going on. And so there's another example of where construction is underway and it's just creating additional congestion. So again, short term or maybe not so short term pain, sometimes depending on how long these fixes take, for the long term gain where we see improved speeds.
Okay. Well, that's all I had, Rebecca. Is there anything else that you want to add or you think people need to know about this topic?
I just what I love to point out is, is as we started the show, it's so subjective. If I drive a certain route every day and it takes me so long to get to work, I think that's the worst traffic. And interestingly enough, we have had locations who have reached out to us and been angry that they aren't higher on the list because they want to be able to build the case for why they need to invest in their infrastructure. So they're like, are you sure that data is solid? Because we think we should be a lot higher on the list. So I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So.
Hey, thanks for watching. To stay up to date on the latest in trucking news, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to be notified of new videos when they come out each week.